Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Anto Budiojo. This is Monday Live, something we do every Monday. It is at 3 p.m. Eastern. So our profiles are on mondaylive.org. A reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any organization or company. We all know how to use Zoom tools by now, and just a reminder, this deck is on mondaylive.org on the homepage. So our focus on this month, and this being the last week of July, is delivering smarter buildings. And our agenda today is a normal chit chat about news and trends, what's going on. And then the main part, we'll be talking about this thing called the Smarter Stack that we want to introduce to everybody and get some feedback. Should be interesting on that. But before we do that, jump to Ken to talk about your what you're seeing.
Okay, great. We're in July. We're just finishing up navigating the next new, and we're hard at getting out our August issue, and we've adapted your theme of July, delivering smarter buildings. And we're going to kind of feature some of the stuff you've been talking about, because I think it's worth sharing with the folks. The new one thing that has come fairly obvious is the new measured variable is carbon. I think we've always been talking about saving energy in the buildings, but now we're in a situation that we have to basically convert all of that energy into carbon. And are you ready to measure, record, analyze, and react? And what is your carbon strategy? And the last few posts that I put on our news page have been, people are very much using carbon as a marketing tool. Everybody's picking up that people have dates like 2030 and 2040 that they're going to be significantly carbon reduced or maybe even carbon free. The other one is ASHRAE, who tends to kind of document our industry, has set up a task force with 9 groups doing some pretty significant effort in built environment lowering its carbon use. I always find that if you're not doing what ASHRAE basically is sort of turning into code and direction, we're behind the times, because you pretty much we have to basically create the markets, and then they basically document and make standards out of the market, in my mind anyway. Harvard Research has got a good article I liked, capturing the value of AI. The statement that came out of it that caught my attention is most companies believe that implementing an advanced AI solution will lead to significant efficiencies, growth, and competitive differentiation. However, matching the new tools with high value applications and use cases will be challenging. And what they're talking about is, if you're thinking of AI the way you used to think about it, you better change your minds, because it's kind of reappearing in different values. Basically, the graphic that I have on my slide is from a article that we have in our August issue, and you can see already folks are starting to portray carbon rather than energy. This comment was a good one. The industry is just scratching the surface of the smart building technology possibilities. With more data acquired, more information, this technology can be the greater its potential. Sorry about that. This links to an article from a facility management magazine, and so there's some really good information. I was quite impressed with the way it was all presented there. And as always, my LinkedIn shares and Twitter tweets kind of summarize all the things I'm looking at. And if I think there's something that's worth sharing with the industry, I tend to tweet it or provide a LinkedIn. So that's my take for today.
So interestingly enough, Ken, on that carbon measurement, I read an article, I'm not sure if you've seen this too, but I read an article about someone pushed back on this is a good initiative, but has anybody actually measured how much carbon was created in the actual construction of the building, right? So the carbon usage of constructing a new building today, high rise, low rise, small store, is that number significantly larger than any actual carbon usage the building does running it?
I think it is. It's a big consideration in our product, Canadian projects. Actually, the project that I'm sitting here looking at in our town is they built a hotel condominium complex, and what they did is they went to the city and they said, if we don't haul all of the excavation material through town, we basically build a park out in the waterfront and give it back to the city. So that's what they actually did. And of course, they got all kinds of green credits for doing that. And,
wow.
and the building pumps seawater for heating and cooling. So, so it's, I think, yes, the total carbon is becoming a very big issue. And again, this brings us back to starting to deal with the people, the developers, and the people who finance these buildings. They're very important, or they're seeing this as a very important step, because to them, it's whether they get financing or not. If they can portray that their building has looked at reducing carbon even, then they have an easier time getting money. If they're basically just blatantly going to build another building, it becomes tough when they're competing for money.
And another interesting thing about the carbon side of this whole conversation is that Moody's, which is, we all know, is known for their financial ratings and things like that corporate America engages with. And when cybersecurity started its uptake, they started a cybersecurity rating based on a company's cybersecurity rating. And they're now doing the same thing with respect to carbon. So it's kind of interesting that seems like the business side of the house is really seems to be driving this whole conversation and initiatives around carbon initiatives and things like that. Plus, it's the PR side. It's whether or not your company engages in sustainability efforts and being climate positive and carbon negative and carbon neutral or whatever, net zero, is now part of the in vogue everyday conversation with respect to a brand and its presence in the marketplace.
I think the other thing is the climate emergency is, although folks used to sort of just think that, yeah, that's something we should think about. The amount of forest fires we've had, the amount of droughts we've had, the amount of extreme weather, we are actually starting to believe that in fact may be an issue. And of course, up here in the northern country that is slowly starting to melt. It's kind of nice that it's warming up, but one wonders where that's all going to end. It's weird.
But they do make it rain in Dubai.
Yeah.
With drones.
Man-made rain. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the next one, which is you, Mark. Back to you.
So, it's interesting is that early on in our Monday Live conversations about COVID and what's going to happen next and all that, we talked about repurposing commercial office buildings. And obviously that continues to be a conversation. And, we heard everything from homes, residential, to light industrial spaces, to whatnot. This particular one caught me, I thought was really, really interesting, that transforming empty commercial real estate into indoor farms. And I don't think anybody ever thought of that. To be
No, actually, it's not true, Mark. A couple of years ago, that was already started to come out. There's some substantial indoor farms in New Jersey right now that are doing exactly what's described here.
But
very
did they,
successfully. Yeah.
did they build it from scratch?
No, they took
or-
over as I recall, they took over an existing facility. and
Yeah, well,
repurposed it.
I personally think this is an extended opportunity for those of us in this industry. Obviously, controls, everything that a building that you might put in a building for the most part would apply here as well. And obviously, especially controlling light and everything else. Obviously, we've seen it in the growing of marijuana and the increase there, but it's kind of interesting. And here in New York, they're still around a 16.3% vacancy rate for Manhattan alone for commercial office. And it's still the highest it's been since 1994. So I guess everybody's trying to figure out what they're going to do with that space, landlords and everybody else. So
Hey, Mark,
interesting article.
can I add to that? There's actually a couple of startup companies out there right now that are looking at retail space, and not necessarily the larger retail space, but even small, like 10, 20,000 square foot of retail space. And they're actually transforming those into different things. So there's one that's transforming those into kind of, I guess the only way to call it would be hostels. So, come in, here's a bed, shower, whatever. So they're doing that. Another one is transforming it into like kitchens. So if you have a catering business or something like that, so it's kind of co-shared kitchens for a number of reasons. So there are actually, and I like the farming, all the as well, like what you mentioned here, but so there are lots of people that are thinking of repurposing. So it's going to be interesting for years, I think. Just wanted to add that.
Cool.
Okay, cool. So moving on, there aren't any more slides. So I was just going to make a comment that COVID is obviously kind of starting to potentially come back again, and we should be sort of worried about that. I last week I went to London, my first international trip since COVID times, and my comment on that is that if you're thinking of traveling internationally, don't. I mean, it's just a pain. It's just, I mean, it's just difficult to get through because of all the tests and all the procedures. The travel itself was actually pretty good, but it's just I would not suggest it, and that may well continue for maybe the rest of this year.
Yeah, I saw a report the other day that showed that travel is down at 46.6% of where we were before COVID, and it's just not recovered at all. It's just flatlined literally, and doesn't look like it's picking up anywhere at the moment. China is slightly different. That's the only place where flights are getting back to normal.
Yeah, both my flights across the Atlantic were only 20% full, as it were. But it's just a hassle around the testing regimes and all the different ways that the various different countries deal with things. So anyway, don't do it. Okay, so let us move on to the main part of this show, which is the Smarter Stack. I have prepared a slide deck that we can show the group here. So what is the Smarter Stack? It's a tool that the Monday Live group has been working on actually for quite some time now. The genesis of it is actually about a year ago, but it's evolved into what it is that we're talking about today. And it's really a tool to map the components of the whole product. If you recall, a couple of months back, we were talking about crossing the chasm and the whole product. This is kind of one way of dealing with that. It's a tool to actually visualize what the whole product is all about. And it all kind of starts with this stack. This is a very simple version of the stack of the parts or the players, the stakeholders involved in smart buildings, right? So you have users at the top, they use the buildings, and you have the buildings at the bottom, and you have some magic stuff in the middle that we call it smarts here. This is kind of a simplistic view of what the stack looks like. If you think about this a lot more, you get to something like this, because the smarts is really sort of divided into two things: the apps, or the systems, the applications like analytics and others that many of the people on this show build, and the data side of it. Those are kind of two very discrete components, separate components of what makes up the smart. And all of the, so you get 4 levels here. You have the users, the app stack, data, and buildings. But if you sort of start to zoom in a little bit more and think about the different challenges that these different layers have, you start to think about what the needs are. So they have the 4 levels have different needs. The users need the building to be operated, right, to use as much of the smarts as possible. The apps have different sets of needs, because it needs to be delivered to the users, and it also needs to use the data that's underneath it, as it were. So that's a very specific sort of set of needs. Data needs to be secured and stored and make available to applications, and the building needs to be just sort of managed, and systems need to operate it on a 24/7 basis. Right? So this is kind of starting to zoom into what the stack's all about. And so what we've done is that we've taken this and zoom in a little bit further. And this is what we think makes this stack smarter. So at the users, if you actually think about the users, there isn't really just one type of users, right? We think there are 2 broadly different types of users that we really need to be involved with, that we need to think about. The first is the users that are interested in outcomes. So if you think about the building owners, they are interested in outcomes, whatever those outcomes are. They're obviously different for different buildings. What we classify here as managers are people who actually manage the facilities. So if you think about teachers and managers of stores and things, they obviously have different kind of needs. And the occupants, or the consumers, that are just walking into buildings, right? So these are all people that are interested in outcomes. They want the building to do something for them. But then there's the second group of what generically we call users, which are people that actually have to operate the buildings on a daily basis, right? So that's kind of one sort of distinction that we started to have in terms of users. At the bottom, meanwhile, the buildings is not just the buildings. There's actually 2 different part of the buildings. There's the physical part of the building, the steel and concrete and the equipment, elevators and everything else that actually makes up the building. And then we all know that there are systems on top of that. Technically, these are cyber-physical systems, but they're the control and automation and the devices that we all know and love in this group. Right? This is those are needed to make the buildings operate, to make the physical part into the building. But the middle part is what we focus on in Monday Live, the smarts. And we always talk about this being a complex sort of beast. And the way we sort of depict this sort of complexity is actually splitting it up into these 4 layers. So from the top, we have the first layer is the delivery of those smarts, right? Because the users at the top, the ones that are involved, interested in outcomes or operations, need to use the smart, right? So there has to be some entity that delivers this. And here we're talking about basically what another word for this is the channel, is the SIs, is the MSIs, and all the different players, and also all of the different products that enable the delivery of the smarts. So we'll talk a lot more about this. And then there's the apps. I think of all of the different layers of this stack, this is the one that's sort of very obvious to all of us. A lot of us build these things. The new layer, the new thing that we've been working on really is this that we're now calling the exchange layer. We've had different terms for this. We've called it marketplace, we've called it ecosystems, we've called it various other things, and we've sort of settled on this exchange. And the idea is that this is a part of the layer that's necessary for multi-level sort of systems like this to work, right? They're the things that make the information flow, the data and the apps and the services that can actually flow. The integration is here, the middleware and all the sort of the standards like Haystack is essentially all about that. It's enabling a lot of these other layers of the stack to work, right? So we'll actually come back and talk a lot more about this in the next few minutes. And then there's the data, right? The data layer is probably the simplest one to think about, although the implications are quite complex, all about storing and normalizing and governance and management of that, right? So this is kind of how we think about the entities or the things that are necessary to make the smarts. So these are the 8 levels of the smarter stack. Where we're calling it the smarter stack because we're using this term smarter, as I think we've talked about in the show in previous weeks. It's just the way we want to think about this stack. So this is the same 8 levels as I had before. It's just sort of simplified. And obviously the model of the concept of a stack, I think we should all be familiar with. Sort of the ISO 7-layer network is kind of one of the ways of one of the things that we use a lot, especially if you're talking about networks. But this is really sort of a more of a business and sort of industry structure stack. That's not just for technology, it's actually for technology, for products, and for business roles and other sort of parts of that. So how do we use this? So the thinking is that we would use this essentially as a backdrop to show positioning of things that we want to talk about. And so one example of that is if somebody wants to talk about product X, whatever that product X is, and if it's apparent that product X is actually an application, we put it there, right? Could be on a piece of technology, whatever technology Y is. In this case, it's demonstrating some kind of data related technology. It's obvious just by placing it there. And it can also be used to position companies or logos, right? So this is kind of a way to use that. This is where it becomes a tool. One way of actually thinking about this is what we as the industry is actually going through right now is we're sort of morphing between a business model or a structure that this industry has been working on in the basis of this industry for decades, calling it here the traditional BAS offering. And if you think about traditional BAS offering, and this is obviously, there's a word proprietary here that's not written here, but it's kind of implied, is that this model, it has the systems, in other words, has the control systems sort of part of this, and it has the data component part of it in a proprietary way. If you take any of the traditional BAS offerings, it has a lot of data in it, but it's actually being kept inside that system. You may argue that there is no exchange. Well, I think there are exchanges, there are ecosystems. I used to run the TAC marketing organization, and we used to have partner meetings. That's basically the model of an exchange in the traditional sense. Again, it's proprietary because it's internal to the company. Apps, obviously, traditional BAS offerings have a lot of apps, again, enclosed in the sort of proprietary model. And the delivery is obviously the channel, the branches, and all of the different sort of entities that allow this offering to be delivered. And where do they get delivered? Typically, again, in the traditional sense, is everything's all in-house, right? The outcomes and the operations have typically been in-house because there's not sort of much need to actually split that out, right? But what we are seeing really is a morphing to something more like this. And these are very generic titles, just by way of an example. So the outcomes would actually be the entities using a couple of apps. Some have X and app Y. One of them could be more suitable for the building owners. The other one more on the occupants or consumers. In the operations side, you have the use of things like single pane of glass and digital twins, another thing. up there, but also here is the sort of facility management entities. The delivery, we have SIs, MSIs, MSPs, and engineering consultants. These are sort of individual separate entities. Apps, analytics, indoor air quality, exchange. You could have things like OpenADR, which is a very specific exchange, obviously between buildings and utilities. Something like an app store could also be in here. Data could be in the cloud, or it can be on-prem. So all of these sort of variances, and the systems could be different types of systems, different brands. And it can also be located typically on the edge, with all of the different things that we've talked about. Meanwhile, at the bottom, nothing's really changed. The physical, the building is still the building. So this is kind of one a way of actually thinking about this stack. I'm going to skip past this couple of slides. They're just sort of identifying what functions are actually being done in the different levels that we think, and also who, the type of people that are typically found in these different layers. This deck, we're going to make this available to you. We'll give you the URL to get to it, but so you can actually refer to this in more detail. So the other thing we started to do is actually to create some examples of uses of this tool, right? And a big caveat here, I think you'll find that the use of the use of the smarter stack. There's a lot of subjectivity, and I think that's part of the feature. It's not a problem of the smarter stack, and it's not, it's therefore not necessarily scientific. So one of the first things that I did thinking about this is that there's this concept of an independent data layer that's Sabine Lamb and James Dice and others have been talking about. So how does that fit in the smarter stack? So this is how it fits. This is the diagram that I found in one of the, I think in Ken Sinclair's article. And I noticed that there's actually something missing. They don't have anything on the exchange, right? So they have the applications and the data and the connectivity and stuff underneath it. And yet there's another diagram that actually has the independent data layer. So that basically explains that as being the exchange layer. Then we start to think about the different categories. So this is a bit of an eye chart, but we were trying to sort of put as many categories as come up in conversations in our Wednesday conversation and others. So something like consultants is here, energy management is in the applications. If you think about the exchange, we're talking about here gateways and middleware and various other things. Again, the vertically integrated stack goes all the way from systems all the way up to delivery. In the system side, you have control, physical security, sensors, lighting, etc. That can obviously go on. So it just gives you sort of an idea of how we can use this tool to actually place different products or different categories of products. And obviously, on the bottom, there's different types of physical buildings. One of the things that's not on that previous slide is connectivity and communications. And one way of actually thinking about connectivity and communications is like this: use the whole stack, because there are entities related to communications and connectivity that actually belong in different parts of the stack. Right? An antenna and Cat5 are all physical things, right? Websites and mobiles are really delivery mechanisms, right? And bandwidth and latency and all these kind of things, those are all outcomes. Those are what you want out of a system. And I find 5G is kind of the way they delivered, the way what you actually use, the operations, right? So this is another way of just sort of using the stack for this specific sort of set of use cases. The other way of actually using the stack, which is this one, is to think about using it for a requirement definition, right? So this is kind of a make-believe high school requirement. What maybe I'm talking to a high school superintendent or whoever manages the school, and they're sort of communicating what their outcomes, what they need. They need scheduling, they need comfort, they need social thing, and they need critical safety, right? And these are the operational products or things that's needed for that school to operate. The delivery, they're thinking of using a managed service provider maybe, and there's also a local HVAC, and maybe they also need some kind of console, right? So again, we're just sort of placing these things in the stack to actually sort of identify where they belong. And down the bottom, HVAC and fire systems could belong there, right? So this is sort of one way of using this tool to sort of demonstrating the value of using it to sort of depict all of the components that otherwise would be really sort of difficult to depict. Another way to use this is to do it for technologies. These are a whole bunch of technologies and standards and protocols that we've come across. Everything from IP to very specific standards from ASHRAE that actually belong in different places, and K8S is Kubernetes, and different pieces, different standards and different technologies actually belong in different parts. And in some cases they span multiple layers, which is okay. Haystack, you can argue it's an exchange thing, but you can argue it's also a data thing, and that's okay as well. So this is another example of the use of this. And there's a lot of discussion on Monday Live over the past few months about the financial side of things, right? And so this is one way of depicting that. What is it, right? The first two, physical and systems, are typically CapEx because they're hardware oriented, and everything from data upwards all the way to operation is typically OpEx. And that's and right at the top is the value. It's what the users are actually getting out of the building, right? So this is one way of depicting that. This next one, I'm not so sure about. I'm not that great at accounting, but there's kind of a balance sheet kind of way to think about this, that there are assets and there are expenses, but I'm not sure this is right. Engagement in terms of how you engage a vendor for something that belongs in these different layers. I don't know why I keep on doing that. So physical, obviously a building is potentially last for 100 years, system lasts for 20 years, data lasts forever. These things are typically going to be potentially best done with SaaS, delivery and operation, possibly best done by a contract or project, and the outcomes are of a daily instance, right? So they're all different. Procurement, this is Jim Lee's sort of favorite topic here. The procuring of a building is a major deal, and then the systems, there's different ways of doing that, RFP or design build. The data is procured by capturing it or buying it, right? That's all you can do. Exchange is usually some kind of tech spec. Apps ideally will be an app store. Delivery is typically a relationship kind of selling relationship mechanism, and potentially a bidding sort of process for the operations, and the value, everything from millions of dollars to monthly kind of ways of actually thinking about the values of these different services, right? So again, this is just another way of thinking of using this to think about different parts of the puzzle. This is kind of the last one, is that one of the things about this stack is that different people will actually have different perspectives of the layers that's important to them. Right? So a building owner, if you think about this one, a building owner cares about the outcomes and the operations. That's all they care about. They don't really care about the makeup of everything anything underneath that, but that's really their focus. A consumer, somebody just walking into buildings day in and day out, they don't even care about the operations. They just want the outcome of being able to go and buy a dress at the store or whatever it is, right? And an integrator would be more focused, let's say, in the delivery and in terms of delivering something to the operation and using underneath it and integrating to other things, right? So depending on who you are, you actually look at this stack in a different perspective, and so that's a lot of the thinking that we're doing here. So I kind of want to leave it here and engage into a conversation with the group, and hopefully get some input from the audience here in terms of our thoughts on this. But initially want to throw it back to the group, and I'm going to stop this share so that we can have a chit chat.
I think, and just to kind of reinforce the points that you're making, the critical point about this thing is we see this thing as being a tool, right? The template is a tool that per Anto's use cases and examples, there are many different perspectives of how to use the tool, from technology, you know, to installation, to, you know, people like you see here. So think of it as a tool to be able to use to explain to building owners, operators, you know, what is this smart building all about, and what are all the pieces? Because we find that there are just gaps in people's understanding. And the problem is the gaps are multidimensional. You know, sometimes you'll get a discussion about data and data types. Another time you'll get a discussion about who's installing it. Another time you get a discussion about, well, who's going to use it. And so we're looking to see if there's a tool that can help consistently tell a consistent story.
Yeah, I've often had this stack up on my screen on past Monday Lives, and when somebody says something, I was also almost sort of using that, using the stack of saying, oh, he's talking about a middleware, or he's talking about data thing, right? So that's the way to do it. Otherwise, you know, we talk about things all the time. We talk about different abstract things or even specific products, and it's really difficult to relate them with each other. So
I've kind of along the same lines, Anto, two real uses that I found from as we've been kind of looking at this is, one is it creates sort of a vision here of what this all looks like, an overall picture for somebody who is coming from the outside. I think it's a good tool for that. And the other thing is just a mapping tool. Like you said, when somebody brings something up, or you look at a new product or a company, it kind of helps you understand where they fit in the big picture, right? You can kind of plot them into a couple of different places, or whatever it might take to sort of cover what they do, their services, their products. And it's really handy to kind of understand how everything sort of aligns and interplays.
I'd add that it, as a tool, I think it helps bridge the gap between the technology side and the outcome side. Too much, I think, you know, at least since I've been in this industry, it's heavy-handed towards the technology side and not enough equal balance with respect to the outcome side. So I think this allows people to kind of think of the outcome side equally at the same time as the technology side. And as a tool, as a framework, it also helps, in my opinion, start to identify some specific deliverable KPIs can come out of this. If you're talking to, you know, a school, as Anto showed, some of the KPIs might be a little bit different than that to a commercial building or to a retail environment, so forth and so on. So again, I think this, you know, one of our goals was to try to bridge that gap, and I think we've done a pretty good job here.
This one, the high school requirements thing, and I can almost sort of hear the conversation, right? I'm sitting maybe on the phone and I'm talking to somebody, you know, let's say Mark, and we're trying to sort of figure out what it is that he needs for his school, and I'm trying to figure out what he needs and what's possible. And then you literally sort of use this to actually say, okay, you have a local HVAC that you like to provide, great, you do that. And you can even, obviously these are all generic here, but in real life, you could actually put somebody's name on it, a company's name, right? Acme Corp or whatever, right? And they'll say they want demand response, so you put that in. And then it becomes almost like a requirement specification of that conversation of what I need, so what my customer needs, and what I'm hearing you need. So it becomes a sort of a high-level requirements document.
You can extend that.
People.
You can extend that to roles and responsibilities too. As I'm listening to you talk, that's the first thing that comes in mind is who's responsible for what parts of this. Like even during a bidding process or setting up an organization or anything like that, that's going to take care of something new.
I think just to be clear. I mean, we've drawn neat boxes and, you know, well-defined outlines and stuff. But, you know, recognize there are times when those edges might be a bit fuzzy, right? Where some of these features might sort of leak over into the other areas, and that's okay, right? So
I think we would all agree that this is a work in progress and would expect it to evolve over time, right?
I think
You know,
it's-
as an industry, we've had a lot of conversations really oriented towards how to make the buildings smarter, right? And this is a great tool for visualizing what the core issues and technologies are, and you know how things get put together. Ultimately, it's about outcomes and operations effectiveness. That's what anybody who's in the business is trying to provide to their customers. The question I have is how we can take this and help ourselves identify the weak links in the chain. So we can all agree that an owner wants this or that, and the operations people want a certain amount of information. Actually getting it to them in an efficient, affordable manner is going to vary depending on what they're asking for to some degree. But we also know already that there's some gaps. There's things that we're just not able to do that we would like to be able to do because we're not there as an industry. And so what I'd like to see us, maybe one of the exercises we can do this month or in the future months is really talk out where are those weak links in the chain, because it provides guidance to the industry. Hey guys, we need to do better in this area and that area. You know, particularly on the data side, we know that how the data gets normalized, how it gets shared, exchanged is the word you're using, how it's accessible, how easily or difficult it is to access that information. Those are all key weak links, if you ask me, in the chain right now, that and in turn drive our inability, if you will, to deliver outcomes. So, but I think there's a lot of it's a very good visualization tool to start zeroing in, and you can talk about delivery too. What, you know, MSI versus SI. What really, where are the weaknesses there when it comes to delivering? So you can use it in a lot of different ways to discover this, to point out the strengths and weaknesses in a given section of the stack.
I think the other thing, Steve, as you mentioned there about the industry, is it kind of is showing how the industry's moved on. When you think about, if you went back 6 years, you wouldn't be looking at hardly any of that stuff that's in there. And it also helps people understand that, you know, these days you can't be all things to all men. You know, you can't provide all that. You know, whereas before people kind of, because it was on-prem, they thought they could offer everything that could be done there, from the integration to the delivery of the data and the maintenance. But I think with this, it's showing that it's on-prem, it's service providers, you know, there's integration on-site, off-site, you know, and there's a whole range of areas now in the industry that didn't exist before. And this kind of highlights that, I think, really well.
At the same time, as I put right at the very beginning, is that it actually shows this whole concept of a whole product, because all of the pieces are there that you can actually portray. But Bill, you were going to say something.
Yeah, one of the ways I like to view this, I think Nicholas asked, like, how are people going to use it? How about just as a starting point, maybe? Just as a starting point, and with the notion that, who knows, in 6 months, as we dig into this, this is a completely different kind of document, but it's certainly a starting context to sell, to design, to implement new products, ways to speak to salespeople, ways to speak to, I mean, you could use this in a number of different ways, and it's got to be a living document. It's got to be a living document.
Well,
and I think it's going to be okay, even that sometimes there's going to be subjectivity to it, right? So, you know, where I might put someone in that space, you might be different to where, say, Anto puts it in the space. But that's kind of okay, because you're using it. That's when you do that exercise, then at least you've got a common basis to start the discussion as to why did I put why did I put it here versus why did Anto put it here, right? And now you've got a meaningful discussion that you can have as to the reasons for those two.
Yeah, I think you're right. By different people placing things different in different places, it's actually a mechanism to align those views.
Right.
Because if you're not aligned, you're not going to do business. You're not going to do anything successfully. But once you align, wherever it ends up to be, so actually having different opinions depicted by this is actually a great thing.
For sure.
Well, I think it'll actually show the different opinions where we've had the different opinions. We just haven't had a way to communicate the differences.
For sure. And you could sit and, like you go to an art museum and you sit and you look at a picture, you just sit for hours. You could sit for hours with something like this, just contemplate it, see where you fit in, see where you thought you fit in, but you're really here. I mean, this could open up all new ways of organizing how we look at this whole stinking industry.
The other thing that sort of occurs to me is that when you initially look at this, this is why we show the sort of the traditional model versus the sort of broken up model. You're almost, the gut feel is that I want to own all of the stack. I want to have everything from bottom to top, right? That's kind of the gut feel that you have. And maybe that's because I've been around this industry so much. But
That's weird, man.
I know that's weird, but actually that is actually the worst thing you want, right? Because we all specialize in something very specific. And when we try and vertically integrate everything around our central core value, right? We're diluting ourselves and we're actually not good at the other stuff, right? So a much better approach is to say, okay, I'm really good at this, or maybe two pieces, and let other people contribute their best pieces so that we can together make up the solution the building wants.
I think that's where the bigger BAS companies think they can do everything, and it kind of will be their undoing because they won't be agile enough to actually provide all of it. And I think, it's going to be a problem for them if they continue on thinking that they can just do everything in that, which is what I think they're attempting in their minds, thinking they can do now.
That's interesting, Roger. So when you look at this, for all of you guys who are like forever in this industry, when you look at that and you look at the fully integrated companies, does their trying to be all things to all people start to make sense, or does it become even more absurd after looking at that piece of work, Anto? That's kind of what I'm wondering.
I think that's great. I do want to invite anybody in the audience, if you have some strong thing that you want to say, or just put your hand up and we can bring you in if you have something that you think is worth sharing. The sort of, to answer Nicholas's question about how we want to use this, we are going to dedicate next month, the month of August, to figuring out or exploring how this smarter stack can be used. And what we intend to do is we'll pick a topic, for example, sustainability or ESG, right? And we'll use the smarter stack and say, okay, what are the pieces for ESG that's relevant and where do they fit? And then sort of explore that way, and we can do other sort of topics. And the idea is we'll get some guests that actually can speak to either one particular layer or product that they have that actually fits that particular layer, and just talk about this. That's our intent over the course of August.
Yeah, I think it should be fun.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say too, we're actively looking for feedback, whether it be here in chat or comments or via email, or just if you've got thoughts that come in later, or you found a way that you've applied this, or have a question about how you might use this, reach out to somebody in the group or the group at large so that we can continue to evolve this.
I think that's a good point, Tracy, because I'm not sure we made clear, but this is kind of really where we're first showing the work that was done here, right, to this smaller group to get feedback.
You guys in the audience here today are the first to see this publicly, And because many of you have followed us and have sat through a lot of the topics, sort of have a feel for why this evolved into what we have. This, you can go back through and tie this back to several of the different focuses or topics that we've talked about. And this is sort of a culmination of trying to articulate all of that and paint a picture of it. So we're
Okay,
really
so
actively looking.
I'm sensing Brian and Nicholas want to have something to say, so I'm going to pull them both in. How about that? There's Nicholas and where's Brian up there? Here you go. You both come in and say your piece. Whoever comes first.
That's funny.
Brian.
I prefer to stay anonymous. No, when you brought up ESG, it's something that we've been talking about a lot. And you know, when you really look at the pure definition of ESG, there's not a lot we contribute. There's some, because ESG is very, very, very broad. But I think as organizations are trying to figure out sustainability goals and carbon footprint and all of those things, I think you start to find that the data we actually have and produce contribute a lot more to the real ESG goals. And so I think we can be a bigger voice in the whole ESG world. And I'm just curious as to what your thoughts on that are. And I think it would be worth, you know, dedicating one or two of these Monday Lives to that topic.
To use the stack, the smarter stack to try and map that as one way.
You certainly could, yeah. I mean, you know, because obviously there's outcomes, which is performance for ESG goals, right? I mean, you're not just feeding. I mean, a lot of that is shareholder value and ultimately asset value that you're building with ESG. And so the more the tighter the connection between a smart building and effectively meeting your ESG goals that we can make, the better opportunity we'll have to create value for those enterprises. So I think it's a worthwhile effort to make that connection.
Nicholas?
Yeah, I mean, super interesting. Actually, Ken sent me some glimpse beforehand, and I thought it was fantastic. And I think, like, you know, well done. I don't know who was involved. If it was just you and or everyone from Monday Live, it would have been a fantastic job. And like I said in the comment, I agree with Brian a lot. And also, you know, when he was talking about this, I was just thinking, you know, a lot of these initiatives would, you know, have unintended or like great outcomes as well. So you do one thing, but that will result in, you know, again, like with the data, turning that into information and insight into action in a much, much better way, which can be reutilized in many forms, right? But anyway, I'm leading this innovation project here in Sweden. I would love to take this, you know, smarter stack and to do exactly sort of what you were talking about, because it's all about, you know, reducing CO2, creating digital twins at the edge of doing with AI first approach, all this kind of stuff, right? So I think that would be really, really interesting just to see if I can use it and see, you know, what the existing stuff is there, how we're going at it, et cetera, et cetera. So if I would be sort of allowed to have it, and then I could also try to do this tomorrow and get it out for Ken's, you know, automatedbuildings.com on Wednesday for this month episode. If that would be something that would be okay.
Yeah, so this deck that I'm showing you,
yeah,
is available at stack.mondaylive.org. And just go to that address and you see this deck as in a view only session. We intend to convert this into a template, so you can actually use it and start to create these things for your own uses, whatever they are. Internal uses for not just for YouTube, but for everybody. So that's kind of how we want to make it a tool that's open and available for use by anybody.
No, I'll do just that. So thanks so much. I mean, fantastic work. Really, really exciting stuff, actually. Great stuff.
Yeah, I think we would like to support that as well and open the discussion beyond the screen and beyond the Monday Alive, and now start getting some feedback from the industry. As with any new tool, the excitement of any new tool is how people use it, and you can never believe how they will use it so different than you would. But when you see them doing what they're doing, it's a whole new way. So I think that's very useful that we all, even though we disagree with how somebody has positioned something, I think we're having a great discussion as to where that should actually be. So I think that's a very valuable part of it is the more people that touch and feel it and use it, the better it'll be.
Just to make the point clear that we would love input on what's missing or whether we've actually portrayed something wrong or something. I mean, we don't just want people to use it. We do want that, but we want any criticism that could improve it or improve how we can use this.
And people, you
we've
gotta
all been-
remember, this is work in progress. So to Anto's point, it's the group that got together, put this together, the Monday Live group. But we're asking, whoever, make your contributions. This is open source. It's open, we want your contributions, so.
And remember, we've all been drinking the same Kool-Aid, so we need unique perspectives on this.
Yeah, so one example would be thinking about this with your team, with your broader team, right? To think about, where does my product fit? Or I may have 3 products, where do they fit? And does that make sense?
No, I'll share it with the customer actually to see what he thinks about it. He said, so it's both from a real estate owner perspective as also a technical asset manager. And maybe it's, it's a Swedish flavor, so we're like 20 years behind, not utilizing BACnet, just using Modbus proprietary bullshit. So it might be a flash from the past, but I don't know. But I think, that's how I see it as well. So I mean, again, fantastic job, guys. Great stuff.
Yeah, I'll run it by my team too. There's I think somebody already mentioned it earlier that users and the types of users I think could be expanded. I think there's so many different users, even other data sources, because consumers and providers, and so really understanding how different applications actually use the data. And I saw you had apps, as consumers at some point in the stack, but the question in my mind really is that another type of user, right? So when machines start to become users, and then the other thing that I saw in the stack is around the operations, and I think that a lot more facilities, the operations will start to become as a service by providers, and so that now users are also third party, and so how does that whole security model, start from the user, regardless if it's human or machine, all the way down to the edge, right? And so that you really take advantage of modern security models. So I think, like I said, I think it's a great framework. It's a good place to start. It's a lot of work going into getting it this far. So I don't mean it as an insult to say it's a good start, but in a lot of ways, in so many ways it is, and it will evolve, which I know all of you have said. So, and it's great if we could get a large audience all using a common framework, then it certainly does help us all speak the same language. So
Brian, it would be interesting to get Richard Reed and Kathy Farrington and the
Yeah,
other guys
yeah,
at Google's perspective on this.
absolutely. They would, if we could get them to contribute, which I know they're big open source, and they, from how they think, they would certainly support something that's community driven, and it would be great to get them behind this rather than, going.
Maybe we could get one of them come along to talk or present something about it.
Be
Yeah,
great.
Just a thought.
To be one of the sessions in August, to actually apply whatever it is, their perspective, to see how it fits. And I think that the points that you raised, Brian, are good because there are different ways of looking at the problem. And what we want to do is to try and see if that can be assisted with this tool to some degree. It may not be the absolute thing that actually solves absolutely everything, but just to actually contextualize everything.
Yep.
I do like Brian's security aspect of it too. I think that's a dimension we haven't really thought through. How is that represented on here? I think that's an interesting dimension. And it might be just a different slide.
Different
that has
slide
a
with
different overlay. Yeah.
Yeah, different overlay. Yep.
But
Yep.
the only way to learn the tool is to use it. And as when
Right.
you start to use it, you find the edges of what it can do. And then you always see somebody with an innovative approach of actually solving a problem that was a shortcoming of the tool, but actually they're able to do what it is they want. We may need a few more layers above and below, but the only way we'll find that out is by everybody using it.
And this was never meant to be a final. It's a living and breathing animal that I'm sure will continually change as we find out new things within the industry, or we're driving new outcomes or whatever they may be.
All right, and I realize we're way past the top of the hour, so this has been great. And next week we'll take a subject, not quite sure which one it is, maybe ESG or sustainability, and have that conversation around the stack on that.
One thing I think that has to happen is we have to try and think how we would depict AI over the stack. And the first thing would be, well, it does everything on the stack, but the absolute answer to that is no, it doesn't. How are you using AI? And that's the portion of the stack.
Maybe we'll get Keith and some other AI people to be part of that conversation. That'd be great.
Sounds great.
All right. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thanks.
This will be
Brian.
online tomorrow.
So it's stacked at .mondaylive.org is up now.
Okay.
So you can do that. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, y'all.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers.